The lights over my parents' dining room flickered just as my mother raised her glass, her smile stretched tight and triumphant, the kind of smile she wore when she believed she'd outsmarted everyone in the room. I already knew what was coming. I had known for months. But they thought I walked in tonight as the same quiet daughter they'd spent years dismissing. Invisible. Predictable. Easy to control. Instead, I sat at that polished oak table with a secret strapped to my chest like a detonator. My mother tapped her fork against the rim of her wine glass, a soft, crystalline ding that sliced through the chatter. "Well," she said, eyes gleaming as she scanned the table, "since everyone's here, I suppose this is the perfect moment for our big announcement." My older sister, Betrayal, leaned forward, fake surprised. My younger brother, Chase, smirked, already drunk. My father straightened his tie like a man preparing for applause he believed he deserved. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched my mother's mouth shape the words I'd been waiting for. "We finally sold Grandma Elaine's house." My stomach didn't drop. My pulse didn't spike. I had been bracing for this moment long before they ever imagined it. She continued, savoring the attention. "The buyers were desperate to close the deal. Honestly, the timing was perfect. And thank goodness we didn't have to drag Arden." She said my name with that dismissive little lilt she saved for me. "Into the paperwork. She was never part of the will anyway." Betrayal snorted. Chase snickered. My mother smirked, lifted her glass higher, and prepared for her final jab. To moving forward. I finally set down my fork. Slowly. Deliberately. I felt their eyes slide toward me with that familiar mixture of expectation and condescension. Arden, the quiet one. Arden, who never fought back. Arden, who always understood. Only this time, they didn't understand anything. I lifted my glass too, just a fraction, and said calmly, "Well, I hope you enjoyed the sale." My mother arched a brow. "Oh? Planning to send condolences?" "No," I said, my voice steady, cool as ice water. "I'm just glad you like the buyer." My father frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned back, crossing my legs, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uneasy. Then I delivered the strike. "Because the buyer was me." The room fell dead silent. My sister's jaw dropped first. My brother froze mid-sip. My father blinked like he'd misheard. But my mother? Her smirk cracked, hairline fractures spreading across her face. She whispered, "What did you just say?" I folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and met her eyes without flinching. "I bought Grandma's house months ago," I said. "Through a company you never bothered to look up. And I did it because I already knew every secret you tried to bury." A single mechanical reindeer in the corner clacked its head in awkward, oblivious rhythm. No one else moved. They all stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time in their lives. Good. They were about to learn exactly who I was. Because this wasn't the beginning of the fight. People like to say you only get one family, as if that automatically makes it a blessing. I grew up as the proof that sometimes it's just a sentence. From as far back as I can remember, my life slotted neatly between two louder, shinier people. My sister, Betrayal, was the golden one. Honor rolls, trophies, that kind of laugh adults love because it makes them feel like they've done something right. My brother, Chase, was the baby. The one they wrapped bubble wrap around, even as he was the one knocking everything over. Every bad grade, every terrible decision, every mess he made, the world formed a line to excuse him. And then there was me. Arden. The quiet one. The old soul. The kid adults forgot was in the room until I bumped into a chair, or refilled the water jug, or offered to wash the dishes no one else wanted to touch. They called me independent like it was a compliment. What it really meant was, "You don't ask for anything, so we don't have to give you anything." The only place that didn't feel like that was my grandmother's house. Grandma Elaine's place sat on a sleepy street with trees that turned copper and crimson when the wind shifted, and cracked snow-white in winter. Her porch was deep and old, wrapped around the front of the house like a gentle arm. She'd sit there in her faded wicker chair, wrapped in a cardigan no matter the season, humming old jazz standards and swinging one ankle like she was keeping time for the whole block. "Come sit with me, little moon," she'd say, patting the chair beside her. She'd never explain why she called me that. I think it was because I reflected light that wasn't mine. Because I was always there, but rarely noticed. At holiday dinners, when my mother rolled her eyes as I talked about some book I loved, when my father tuned out halfway through my sentences, Grandma would catch my gaze. Just a tiny nod. Just enough to say, "I see you. Keep going." She taught me how to press herbs between book pages and how to stretch a grocery budget farther than it had any right to go. She taught me how to make her slow-cooked stew and how to listen to people not just with your ears, but with your eyes. Sometimes, as we washed dishes in her tiny kitchen, she'd say soft things like, "Some people like to pretend away anything they don't understand." Or, "You're not invisible, you're just quiet." Those are not the same thing. She never said my parents' names when she said it. When she died, I was away in a different city, grinding through night shifts and temp contracts just to keep a roof over my head. They buried her without me. I found out the service time had been changed after it was already over. My mother left a voicemail I still remember word for word. "It was a small thing, dear. Everyone's emotional. It wasn't about you. But somehow, it always was." They held the reception in her house, passed plates over the same table I'd helped her polish, and I wasn't even there to say goodbye. After that, I did what any emotionally exhausted, underfunded daughter does. I kept going. I moved to a different coast, took the first decent job that didn't make me want to disappear, and built a life that didn't rely on their approval. I worked my way up in data security at a mid-sized tech firm. Paid my bills. Bought my own furniture. Learned to keep my voice steady and my expectations low. They checked in when it benefited them. A family group text whenever they needed money for a shared rental. A late happy birthday, Aitee message that felt more like an obligation than affection. A photo of Brielle's promotion. A meme from Chase at 2 in the morning. Then, every so often, there'd be a mention of Grandma's house. At first it was casual. "We're still keeping it for now. Too much paperwork to deal with." Then, "It's just sitting there, you know? The taxes are a lot. Your father and I are carrying everything." I asked once who it legally belonged to, because some part of me needed to hear it outright. My mother shrugged and said, "Well, she left it to us. It's simpler that way. Less drama." I didn't ask to see the paperwork. I didn't ask why simpler always seemed to mean excluding me. But something in me filed it away, quiet and sharp. Years blurred. I worked, saved, moved apartments. Dated the wrong people. Dumped the worst of them. Learned how loneliness can feel less like empty space and more like static. I only went back to my hometown once in all that time. I slipped away to the house while I was there. I remember stepping up onto the porch, half expecting her to appear in that wicker chair, asking why I'd taken so long. Instead, I was greeted by keys hidden under the mat and a lock that stuck because no one had oiled it in ages. The house, it still smelled faintly of lavender and cinnamon. Her piano was there. Her lamp. Her slippers tucked neatly beneath the sideboard. But it felt wrong. Not because she was gone. Because it felt like the house knew it was waiting to be stripped down and sold to someone who'd never know her name. I asked about it one more time before I left town. My parents said words like liability and market conditions and too much responsibility for you anyway. I let it go, on the surface. Inside, something hardened. That something snapped into focus the day I got a text from an old classmate I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, drove past your grandma's place. Saw a big for sale sign on the lawn. Thought you were all keeping it. That's rough. It felt like someone pressed a thumb into a bruise I didn't know I still had. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, and stared at that message. Then I did what I rarely did with my family. I called. My mother answered on the third ring, sounding like she was in the middle of wrapping a present or frosting a cake. Arden, hi. Everything okay? You're selling Grandma's house? I asked. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear the decision behind it. Well, yes, she said, lighter than air. We've been carrying it for years. You know how it is. Taxes, repairs, and you're so wrapped up in your life out there. We assumed you weren't interested. Interested. They always chose words like that. As if I'd declined something that was never actually offered. I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, thanks for letting me know, and hung up. Then I lay there in the half-dark, watching shadows from the streetlight crawl slowly across my ceiling, and realized something sharp and clean. I had been waiting my whole life for these people to choose me. They never would. If I wanted something that was mine, I would have to take it. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Silently. Precisely. The way my grandmother used to prune her roses. The choice came to me in a single, crystal-clear moment. If they were willing to toss her house to the highest stranger without a second thought, then I would become the stranger. I started small. A new email address. A quiet call to the listing agent. A different last name. Hello, I said, mimicking the careful politeness I'd heard from clients at work. I'm Avery Lane. I represent a small investment group looking at older properties with potential. My middle name, my grandmother's maiden name. They'd never taught me how to fight fair, only how to survive. The agent was energetic, all rehearsed enthusiasm and hard consonants. She didn't care about legacy or who used to rock on the porch. She cared about numbers, contingencies, closing dates. We actually just listed that one, she chirped. The sellers are very motivated. Out-of-town family, house has been sitting for years. I booked the earliest viewing she had. By the end of that call, Avery Lane Properties existed on paper as an investment entity. I'd been planning something like it for a while, a vague idea for future projects. Now it had a mission. I flew back without telling anyone. Landed, rented a car, drove past my parents' neighborhood without turning in. When I reached Grandma Street, the sign was there. Big, glossy, cheery font pretending this wasn't a funeral. I parked across from the house and just sat. The agent arrived, all smiles and paperwork. She unlocked the front door and launched into a practiced speech about potential and cosmetic updates and good bones. I barely heard her. Every step I took inside felt like trespassing into my own life. The wallpaper had begun to peel in the hallway. The kitchen tiles were cracked. The garden out back was wild, brambles where rose bushes used to be. Her piano was gone. So were most of her framed photos. But the air still held her, somehow. In the study at the back of the house, her old desk was pushed against the wall, dusty but sturdy. One of her pens still sat in a shallow ceramic dish. I reached out and touched it, just once. Great space for a home office, the agent said behind me. Or you could knock this wall down and open up the floor plan. I smiled politely, the way women do when we're swallowing fire. Let's talk price, I said. I did not overbid. I did not plead. I made a fair offer through Avery Lane Properties, with clean terms and a quick closing. Less than an hour after I got back to my rented room, the agent called. They accepted, she said, thrilled. Wire the earnest funds and we'll get started. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to my ear, and let the words sink in. They accepted. They sold my grandmother's house to a name they didn't recognize, because they never thought to look deeper than a surface. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd forgotten who taught me how to be patient. The paperwork moved fast. My history and data security helped, I knew how to make documentation airtight, how to register addresses and signatures so nothing bounced back. When the final documents came through, I printed them and spread them across my kitchen table, fingers resting on the line that said, "Owner, Avery Lane Properties, managed by Arden Lane." Grandma's house was mine. Not because they gifted it, but because I took it back. I didn't tell them. Not yet. Because I knew something else they didn't know. Their lie about the house was only one thread. If I tugged on it, the entire tapestry might come undone. So I waited. And right on schedule, a message buzzed through the family group chat a few weeks before the holidays. From my mother. Christmas dinner at our place this year. Smart dress. We have big news to share. Let us know if you'll make it. No mention of the house. No mention of the sale. I typed, "I'll be there." Deleted it. Typed, "Wouldn't miss it." Deleted that too. In the end, I just sent a thumbs up emoji and booked a flight. The thrill I felt wasn't joy. It was something colder. Cleaner. By the time I was standing in their hallway in my charcoal dress, shaking off the cold, I'd already been through every scenario in my head. Maybe they'd pretend the house had fetched some miraculous price, brag about their smart choices. Maybe they'd mock me again, say how I'd never been part of the will anyway. They had no idea I'd built my own script. No idea I'd read theirs. But before the Christmas dinner reveal, something else happened. Something that made this more than pettiness. More than payback. It started with a single, nagging question on the flight home. If they were willing to sell the house so easily, what else had they lied about? I didn't chase that thought down yet. But it sat there. Waiting. The morning after Christmas dinner, the text messages began. From Chase. "Mom's losing it. She says you manipulated them. Wild even for you." From Brielle. "Very dramatic, Arden. You couldn't have had a grown-up conversation instead of ambushing them in front of everyone?" From my mother. "We're disappointed, but not surprised. Your choices have consequences. Don't expect us to help you if this backfires." Help. As if they'd ever helped me with anything that actually mattered. I put my phone face down and listened to the hum of the hotel heater. I should have felt victorious. I'd outplayed them. I'd turned their big announcement into my reveal. Instead, I felt unsettled. It wasn't just the house. It was the look that crossed my mother's face when she said, so casually, "Arden was never in the will anyway." Like it was a joke. Like I was the punchline. On the flight back to my city, I couldn't shake that sentence. Never in the will. I remembered how close I'd been to my grandmother. How many evenings we'd spent at that old desk, her teaching me to sort bills and review statements and understand the difference between enough and barely scraping by. If she'd truly left me nothing, I could have accepted that. Grieved it. Moved on. But the way my parents relished saying it? That felt wrong. So one night, after work, I sat down at my own small table with my laptop and a cup of too strong coffee and opened the browser. I typed in my grandmother's full name and the words, "probate records." Public filings are funny. They're invisible until you know where to look, then they're everywhere. I found the property transfer first, a deed transferring the house to my parents soon after her death. Not through her estate, but through a quick transfer document filed at the county office. Fast. Quiet. Efficient. A red flag, if you know how these things usually go. I kept digging. Finally, I found her estate case file. There was a will attached. An older one. It left the house in my mother's control. Named my father co-executor. Neatly boxed me in with a generic phrase about beloved grandchildren, but nothing specific. So maybe my mother had been telling the truth all along? My chest ached as I scrolled. I almost stopped. Then a small note in the file caught my eye. Revised testament, later date, on record. See supplemental filing. I froze. There was another will. I requested a copy. Days later, an envelope arrived, thin but heavy with implication. I sat on my couch, the TV off, the city lights leaking through the blinds, and opened it with shaking fingers. The language was formal, as all wills are, but the sentiment was unmistakable. To my granddaughter, Arden Lane, who has always honored the history of this home and the heart within it, I leave my residence and all its contents. I trust her to decide what to preserve and what to release. I read it again. And again. It was all there. Legal. Signed. Dated shortly before she passed. She'd chosen me. They'd known. Somewhere between that document and the day they filed paperwork, someone had decided this will didn't exist. My hands went numb. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't grief. It was theft, dressed up as what's best for the family. Eventually, my vision cleared enough for me to notice something else, a small note about a separate account tied to the property, intended to support the heir with maintenance or personal development, an amount that wasn't life-ending for anyone, but life-changing for me at the time. No one had ever mentioned it. No one had told me it existed. For a long time I just sat there, clutching the paper, feeling something rip free inside me. Not rage. Not sadness. Something deeper. A refusal. A refusal to keep accepting this as just how my family is. I made 2 calls the next day. First, to the records office, to confirm the filings. Second, to a lawyer. His name was Malik. He worked in a modest, cramped office above a coffee shop that smelled like burnt beans and sugar. He read through the documents with a careful eye, tapping a pen against his lip. "This older will," he said, "is the one your parents submitted. But this new one is clearly more recent." "And the transfer deed for the house? The one that moved it into their names?" "The notary stamp looks off." He looked up at me. "You understand what this implies, right?" "I understand they lied," I said, my voice rough. He nodded slowly. "We might be looking at deliberate concealment of a valid will, and possibly a forged deed. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But you have a strong case if we can back this up with witnesses and records." I left his office with the copies in a neat folder and my heart pounding. On my way down the narrow staircase, my phone buzzed. A call from my mother. I almost ignored it. Almost. I answered. Her voice was softer than usual, dipped in sugar. "Hi, sweetheart. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. Christmas got emotional. None of us meant to hurt you." I let the silence stretch. She continued, "We didn't realize how much that old house meant to you. You never said anything. We were just trying to simplify." Simplify. Like erasing me was a favor. "I read Grandma's will," I said. The pause on the other end of the line was sharp enough to cut through the noise of the street. "The most recent one," I added. "The one where she left me the house. The one you never filed." Her inhale was audible. That must be some older draft." "You're confused. You don't understand how these things work. It's dated after the one you used," I said. "And it mentions a trust tied to the house. The one that magically vanished." Her voice hardened. "You are making serious accusations." "No," I said calmly. "I'm finally naming what you did." She didn't apologize. She didn't try to deny it convincingly, either. She just said, "If you drag this family through the mud, Arden, don't expect us to shield you from the fallout." Then she hung up. I stared at my reflection in a dark window pane and realized something important. They weren't afraid of losing the house. They were afraid of losing their version of the story. So I did the one thing they never saw coming. I stopped arguing. And I started building. Once I decided I wasn't going to be quiet anymore, everything shifted. I didn't start with public explosions. I started with foundations. Literally. I took possession of the house not just on paper, but in reality, I moved slowly, bringing in contractors to stabilize the structure, restore what was salvageable, and modernize what needed to be changed. I didn't turn it into a vacation rental. I didn't flip it for profit. I turned my grandmother's home into what she always made it for me. A place where people felt seen. The front parlor became a little reading room with donated chairs and a shelf filled with books about memory, family, home. The dining room doubled as a workshop space for free clinics on basic financial literacy and estate planning. I started a small organization in my grandmother's name, the Elaine Legacy Project, dedicated to helping older people document their wishes transparently, with support, so no one could step in and claim they didn't know what she really wanted. I thought small at first. Just this house. Just this neighborhood. Then a local reporter caught wind of it. A human interest story. Granddaughter turns grandmother's fading home into community legacy center. She came by, took photos of the restored porch, the fresh paint, the old wicker chair I'd managed to repair. She asked why I'd done it. I could have told her everything then. Instead, I said, because one woman's wishes almost disappeared. I'm making sure that doesn't happen to anyone else if I can help it. The article ran. People noticed. Including my family. The texts began again. From Brielle. I saw the article. Cute project. Shame you're using grandma's name to get attention. From my father. If this is your way of punishing us, congratulations. Everyone thinks we're villains now. I didn't answer. Instead, I met with Malik more often. We built a timeline. The date of the original will. The date of the revised one. The suspiciously timed deed transfer. The missing trust. The conversations with witnesses at my grandmother's church, people who remembered her telling them, I want Arden to have the house. She's the only one who listens. We tracked down the notary whose seal appeared on the deed. Her eyes widened when she saw the document. I never signed this, she said. That's my stamp, but that is not my signature. And I wasn't even working that day. Forged. Clear as sunrise. Malik smiled then, a slow, satisfied thing. This isn't just a family squabble, he said. This is fraud. We filed a civil suit quietly. We didn't hold a press conference. We didn't post cryptic social media rants. We just sent reality into motion. And, just as he predicted, the pressure made my parents crack. Extended relatives started reaching out, suddenly curious, suddenly on my side, now that the air smelled like scandal. My cousin Rowan called and said, honestly, I always wondered how the house ended up with them and not you. I just didn't want to get involved. Of course he didn't. My parents' lawyer tried to cast everything as grief-driven confusion. A clerical misunderstanding. A mistake. But the documents didn't care about their tone. They cared about dates. Signatures. Patterns. When the court day came, I wore a simple dark suit and a bracelet of my grandmother's that my mother had forgotten to claim. Malik's notes were stacked neatly in front of us. My parents sat across the room, smaller than I remembered. My mother's posture rigid, my father's jaw clenched. Brielle perched beside them, as if sheer presence could balance the scales. They didn't look at me. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen every ugly thing people could do to each other, listened carefully as Malik laid out our case. He wasn't dramatic. That made it worse for them. He didn't need theatrics when he had a valid, later-dated will naming me as sole heir to the house. Testimony from people my grandmother trusted, confirming her stated wishes. A notary swearing under oath that the deed was falsified. Emails from my grandmother's accountant documenting her intention, I want Arden to have the house. I've told them this. I hope they honor it. The judge asked my parents direct questions. They dodged. They minimized. We were overwhelmed. We thought the older will was simpler. We didn't realize the new one was final. Their lawyer tried to argue that any mix-up had been resolved since I now already owned the house through a purchase. Malik didn't let that pass. She bought it back, he said. With her own money. From people who had taken it in violation of her grandmother's legal will, and then mocked her for supposedly never being included. Silence settled over the room like dust. Then Malik submitted one last piece of evidence, a page from one of my grandmother's journals I'd found tucked in a box beneath the stairs, written in her gently looping script. She hadn't meant for it to be read in court. But she'd written it like she knew this might happen. If anyone ever tries to pretend that I didn't choose Arden. Trust what is written, not what is whispered. People rewrite conversations. Paper doesn't. The judge read it twice. When she finally spoke, her voice was cool and steady. She ruled that the later will was valid. That the earlier filing had been wrongful. That the deed transferring the house to my parents was fraudulent. That the trust attached to the property belonged to me and had been mishandled. And then, she said something my parents would never forget. This court cannot change the past. But it can correct the record and ensure that the law reflects the truth that was ignored. Damages were awarded. The trust was restored and expanded through penalties. Part of those funds, at my request, were directed to the Elaine Legacy Project, formally acknowledged in the judgment as a vehicle preserving the decedent's stated wishes. My parents had to sign papers under oath to unwind what they'd done. For once, ink betrayed them instead of protecting them. After the gavel came down, no one rushed out. My parents rose, stiff and pale. Betrayal finally looked at me, a long, burning look full of fury and something almost like fear. I didn't approach them. We weren't in the hallway of our family home, with them blocking the kitchen door and telling me to lower my voice. We were in a place where truth had weight. And I had finally learned how to stand under it without breaking. Malik touched my shoulder. You did it. I laughed once, softly. She did, I said. I just followed her instructions. The verdict rippled outward over the following weeks. My mother resigned from her beloved neighborhood committee, not because she wanted to, but because people started asking pointed questions about integrity and trust. My father lost a business partner who decided he didn't want to be tied to anyone investigated for forging legal documents, even if no criminal charges were filed. Betrayal saw several clients pull their events from her boutique planning company, citing bad press and public image. Chase sent a single message. I didn't know everything. I should have asked. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. But forgiveness, I've learned, is not the same as reopening a door you finally had the courage to lock. I didn't respond. The Elaine Legacy Project grew. We held workshops. Helped families talk through things they'd been avoiding. Helped older neighbors put their wishes in writing before anyone else could speak for them. Sometimes, after everyone left, I'd sit in the reading room with the lamp on low and listen to the house breathe. Old wood, new purpose. On the first anniversary of the court ruling, I invited a handful of people over, volunteers, neighbors, a couple of women who'd told me their own stories about being erased by their families. We sat on the porch. Someone brought homemade pie. Someone else brought a battered speaker that played soft jazz that reminded me of my grandmother humming on warm nights. At some point, I settled into her old wicker chair. The same one I'd watched slowly collapse under weather and neglect, then restored. I looked out across the street, at the stretch of road that had carried my family toward me and away from me more times than I could count. Headlights appeared in the distance. A car slowed as it approached the house. Familiar shape. Familiar dent near the back bumper. My father at the wheel. My mother beside him. They didn't pull over. They didn't wave. They just drove by. For a breath, I wondered if they'd circle the block, if they'd finally step out, if some version of an apology might exist in their universe. They kept going. And for the first time, I didn't feel that old stab of longing. I just felt free. I stood, walked to the porch switch, and flipped on the light. Not for them. For the people who'd come tonight. For the ones who'd come tomorrow. For the version of myself who once sat alone in a dark apartment, wondering if I was worth fighting for. They could keep their shadows, their whispers, their half-truths. This house, this legacy, this story? It was no longer theirs to control. As the car turned the corner and vanished into the dark, I let the quiet wash over me, then turned back to my guests, to the laughter, to the clink of glasses and the rustle of conversation on the porch. Behind me, the house glowed warm and steady. I smiled and stepped inside. Some doors, once closed, shouldn't open again. But some lights, once turned on, never need to go off. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.